ceremony for this event. For taking the time to be here. We know you have so many things on your plate. We appreciate that you took the time to be here with us on this forum. We have a beautiful plan for you here at the African Leadership Excellence Academy. This is an African forum. But before I get into invite the head of the Academy, His Excellency Dr. Miret Dabebe, for opening remarks.
Good morning. Your Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, other heads of states are on their way, distinguished ministers, ambassadors, diplomats, and invited guests. It's my great honor and privilege to welcome you all to the African Leadership Excellence Academy and to this special forum as part of the 36th AU Heads of State Summit. Today's summit is focused on the reinvigoration of Pan-Africanism in this fast-changing world. We're delighted and honored to have you all here with us to set the tone as well as shape the agenda of Pan-Africanism for the decades to come. I'm also very encouraged to have the presence of our highly sought-after scholars who themselves are staunch Pan-Africanists and are ready to share their thoughts with us. While the first Pan-Africanism movement was about decolonization and independence of Africa, I believe the new spirit of Pan-Africanism is about the realization of the peace and prosperity of our continent. The immensely successful Green Legacy Initiative, championed by His Excellency Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed, is one of the Pan-African endeavors we would like to capitalize during this engagement as well. Since its re-establishment a year and a half ago, our academy has been building its capacity to equip leaders, conduct research, and provide policy advice. In addition to the state-of-art facility we're in, the academy is undergoing several phases of development and reforms that will allow it to host all Africans so we can collectively transform our leadership capacity and idea generation. Again, I warmly welcome you all to our academy located in this beautiful town of Sululta in the northern outskirts of Addis, next to the beautiful Ntoto Park. I wish you all a pleasant and productive stay. And now, please allow me to invite His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, to deliver his keynote message. Thank you.
Excellencies, ministers, ambassadors, diplomats, and invited guests. It's a great honor for me to address you today and welcome you to this new campus of the African Leadership Excellence Academy, or AFLEX, as it is called in short. AFLEX is a recently established premier institution for leadership training, research, and policy advice. This vast campus and a state-of-the-art facility is envisioned to host Africans from all corners of the continent, who will network, ideate, and deliberate upon the direction and destiny of our beloved Africa. We envision it to be where African leaders, academics, and professionals gather to exchange ideas, make decisions, and set a continental agenda. It will also serve as an incubator for future leaders where 3 generations of exiting Existing and emerging leaders can learn from one another. Hence, the establishment of this academy is a testimony of Ethiopia's commitment to sustaining the richness of Pan-Africanism. At the dawn of a new year, two monumentous occasions loom large in 2023 for Africans. Firstly, this year marks the 60th anniversary of the founding of the Organization of African Unity. And secondly, we also observe the 10th year anniversary of the launching of Agenda 2063. These two milestones capture the spirit of today's forum, celebrating the past, envisioning the future. As we reflect on our past journey of many achievements and setbacks, and as we navigate changing world, it's imperative we also dream and define the decades that lie ahead of us, and hence, reinvigorating Pan-Africanism for a changing world is a critical assignment we must take up in our aspiration to articulate and elevate our African Union. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, reinvigorating and recalibrating Pan-Africanism requires us to disrupt the status quo and leap into the future. Potentials need to change into products. Our minds need to transform our lands. We need to create clean and green environment like this academy. Pan-Africanism should flourish as an idea of cooperative integration, global competitiveness, and peaceful coexistence. African youth and women should share their due space in leadership and development. We cannot let constructed divides, geographic boundaries, and political ideologies hijack our Pan-African ideals. The crisis in global leadership calls for Africans to step up collectively and think beyond our confines. The changing world and its yet to be defined order calls for a new brand of leaders that are agenda setters, creative thinkers, and solution makers. This is an academy that will raise and shape such African leaders. And such forums are the necessary platform to cultivate a habit of dialoguing into the future. I wish you all expansive deliberation. Enjoy your stay. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed. That really sets the stage for this forum. As Dr. Miret mentioned, the title of this forum is Reinvigorating Pan-Africanism for a Changing World. This is a particularly good year to have these kind of conversations, and welcome to the heads of states that are joining us. Really happy to have you here. We have quite the day planned for you. This conversation is particularly poignant this year because it is the 60th anniversary of the AU's founding and the 10th anniversary since the AU's The Africa We Want Agenda 2063 was set. According to the AU, Agenda 2063 is Africa's development blueprint to achieve inclusive and sustainable socioeconomic development over a 50-year period. It is a vision for integrated, prosperous, peaceful Africa driven by its citizens, representing a dynamic force in the international arena. So I'll say that again. Integrated, prosperous, peaceful Africa driven by its citizens. That sounds like the spirit of Pan-Africanism to me, but as the title of this forum suggests, perhaps The vision of Pan-Africanism needs to be reinvigorated in this rapidly changing world. It is in this spirit that we begin this forum. We'll first have 2 presentations, followed by a moderated discussion. The heads of states are particularly encouraged to give us your thoughts on the topics presented afterwards from a high leadership perspective. The discussion will be moderated by Dr. Rahel Kasahun, founder and managing director of the Africa Unbound Center. After that, we'll break for the heads of states tree planting and photo op, and then we will go to lunch. We will have an afternoon session afterwards where the discussion will be opened up to the audience. If you need to go to the restroom, you can go out to the back or to the side, and there will be people that will direct you where to go. So let's go into our presentations. The first 2, the second one will be on the Green Legacy Initiative, but first, we're going to hear a presentation titled, Black is a Country, Pan-African Politics in the 21st Century. So for that, I'm going to invite Professor Kayinde Andrews. He is Professor of Black Studies at Birmingham City University. He's also author of The New Age of Empire and chair of the Harambee Organization of Black Unity. So Black is a Country, Pan-African Politics in the 21st Century. Professor Kayinde Andrews. Round of applause. Thank you.
Good morning. So was I expecting call and response? I'll say good morning again. Thank you. I'm glad to be here, very honored to come over here from the UK, but my family is Caribbean, which means I'm African, right? There's a reason my family ended up in the Caribbean, and there's a reason I ended up in the UK, and I'm very, very happy to be here today. In fact, my father attended the 6th Pan-African Congress in Tanzania in '74, and so this feels like a homecoming of some kind. All right, I wanted to open up the talk by really thinking about, as we're thinking about Pan-Africanism and reinvigorating Pan-Africanism, we really need to have a good understanding of what it was, what went wrong, what has happened, because there are different ideas, different kinds of Pan-Africanism, right? Pan-Africanism isn't just one thing, and we've done a version of Pan-Africanism, I would say. We're doing a version of Pan-Africanism in the AU today, but the question we want to ask is that enough? Do we need to go back? Do we need to rethink? How do we do Pan-Africanism in this current context? So, I always start with this, and I don't want to start bleak, because there's so many good things that are happening, and if you come to Addis, you can see very clearly the development, the things which are happening. There's a strong argument that Africa is rising, that the development is happening, but also we have to be honest, and we have to be honest of the state of the continent and the state of the black world more generally. This is a map of the world, GDP per capita. As you will see, it's the dark green, light green, blue countries which are the richest, and it is the dark red countries that are the poorest. I take this to schools in the UK a lot, and it is blindingly obvious that the richest parts of the world are the white parts of the world, right? America, Western Europe, Australia. The poorest part of the world is this big bit in the middle where we are now, right? Now, not poor in resources, not poor in people, not poor in potential, but poor in economics, right? That is the unfortunate world that we live in today, where Africa, so-called sub-Saharan Africa, is the poorest place in the world by quite a distance. Now, really importantly, this isn't an accident, right? This didn't just happen randomly. This happened because of histories of colonialism, slavery, etc., but it is the world we're in today. Another map, which is equally bleak, tells you life expectancy, and this is 2021. Everywhere else in the world, life expectancy is above 60, into the 70s, 80s. It is only in so-called sub-Saharan Africa where it's under 60, right? So these are the real challenges that we have. This is 60 years after independence in most places on the continent, and we have the poorest place on the world where people die earlier. In fact, there's a big celebration that Africa's continent is the youngest. The reason that Africa's population is the youngest is because people tend to die earlier, right? This is the truth. So, thinking about that, we have another challenge. One that's quite a big and significant challenge, and why it really is important now to think about how we go forward in the future. Population of Africa is going to balloon in the next 50 years. 1 billion people now, estimates of 3 billion people by the turn of the next century. That's a lot of people. If we have 1 billion people on the continent, and I showed you the maps before, this is the reality for life of far too many. Imagine 3 billion people if we don't radically rethink how the continent works, right? Now, this is why Pan-Africanism is important, and this is why it's important to go back to some of those debates we were having 60 years ago at the founding of the OAU, right? Because at the founding of the OAU, there's a couple of particular things I want to pick out that we need to go back and rethink about. All right, so the first one, and it's really important to mention, why is Africa in the state that Africa is in today as it was before? Now, it should be obvious, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this. You should know this. Slavery is the very, very first thing, the reason why my family is in the Caribbean and I live in the UK, right? But slavery happened to Africa. We often think that slavery happened to us because we left, but slavery happened to Africa. Depleted human resources, right? Completely changed the politics and economics of the African continent. When Europeans came to Africa, Europeans were behind Africans, right? This period of colonization that actually is relatively short. Most countries on the African continent were not colonized for more than 100 years. Europeans couldn't just come to Africa and colonize the continent. They didn't have the power to do it. Slavery allowed Europeans to do that because it destabilized, depopulated, et cetera, et cetera. So then you have that large period of 100 years of colonialism, underdevelopment, and really importantly, since independence, and I usually say independence, and I can say this because my family's from Jamaica, which is a perfect example of a country that had political independence but not economic independence. Since independence, we have neocolonialism. Africa is poor today for the same reason it was poor before, right? The resources are taken out, they are taken to other countries, they enrich other countries. Typically, this has been Europe. Increasingly, it's places like China, the formerly underdeveloped world, still leeches Africa's resources. Right now, again, I don't want to spend too much time on this because this should be relatively obvious to any of us that have thought about this. Where I want to focus is, why did this happen? How could this happen? And how could we have stopped it happening? And how could we stop this happening going forward? So importantly, as I said, 15th century, Europeans come to Africa. Europeans are behind Africa. Europeans cannot take over the continent. Not possible. The reason that made slavery possible was that Europeans dealt with us as different groups, right? They pitted different groups against each other. They said, look, we will not enslave you if you go and enslave somebody else. It was even the point at one point in the slave trade where if your family member was enslaved, you could take 2 other Africans and you could trade them for your family member. That's the reality of slavery and what it did to us as a people. So Europeans couldn't have done slavery if we had been united. It's this simple. Continent was united, slavery does not happen. Colonialism, think about colonialism, Europe coming in and taking over most of the countries apart from Ethiopia. Again, if the continent was unified, Europe couldn't have done this. And even today, even how far everything has gone and everything has gone to this point, if Africa was unified, we would be able to resist neo-colonial economics, right? So, what's the ingredient that has been missing on the African continent, and not just on the African continent, but more broadly, it is black consciousness. If we had black consciousness, the idea that, yes, I may be based in the UK, my family in the Caribbean, but actually what happens in Africa is just as important to me as what happens in London or Birmingham or Kingston. If we had black consciousness in the 15th century, slavery doesn't happen, colonialism doesn't happen, and neo-colonialism doesn't happen either. Black consciousness is it's indispensable if we want to move forward as a people. Now, the reason I raise this in the context of the AU and OAU is because this was one of the big debates about black consciousness, right? Africa is now diverse. You have a large Arab population in North Africa. You obviously have many white people now in Africa as well. It's a diverse continent. And there was fears that to say black, to embrace blackness, our color, and what that means is to embrace the same arguments of racism and logic of racism of Europeans. And I promise you that is not the case, right? I promise you that blackness and race are actually two very, very, very different things. Blackness comes about because we are taken from the continent, right? Blackness comes about primarily in the diaspora, because when they took us into slavery, they mixed us up into different groups. We couldn't communicate. They took away our language. My surname is Andrews, not coincidentally. My surname is Andrews because that's the name of a slave owner. I cannot tell you which part of the continent my parents come from, my family comes from. Impossible, because it's so mixed and it's so jumbled through history, right? So because of that, in the diaspora, we had to embrace our blackness. The way that we looked, our hair, our connection, that's the thing that keeps us together. But really importantly, black consciousness is just as important on the African continent. Africa is a place, black is a politics. It is a politic that connects us together no matter what our personal, economic experience is, what our geographical experience is. It is a thing that connects us, binds us, and brings us together. And unfortunately, it's something that we went away from a little bit. We became afraid of blackness at the founding of the OAU, and we need to go back to it. And even though the continent is diverse, we have to assert that Africa is black. And that if we're talking about continental unity, then all the countries in the continent and all the people in the continent have to unify around the idea that we have to raise up all black people on the continent. Because anti-blackness is unfortunately a large feature here. It's a feature in places where you bleach your skin. It's a feature in places in the north of Africa. It's a feature in Europe, it's a feature in the Caribbean. So embracing our blackness is utterly essential to the politics going forward. I use Malcolm X a lot, exclusively almost, and Malcolm had a quote in 1964 where he says, if you're black, you should be thinking black, and if you're not thinking black at this late stage, then I'm sorry for you. And this is 60 years later, and I go back to this map. Let's do this one. Go back to this map. This is why we need to think black, right? Anti-blackness is a real feature of the world which actually leads us to die earlier. Thinking black is the politics that connects us across the diaspora, connects us across Africa, and connects all of these different features together. So I've just put up a random selection of things across the black world. Makoko in Nigeria. In Europe, we're having a big debate about the migrant crisis across the Mediterranean. Now, this crisis has been going on for a long time, and lots of the migrant crisis is West African economic refugees who are leaving Nigeria, leaving Ghana, crossing the desert to get on boats to come to Europe because the economic position is so terrible where they are from. Mass incarceration in the United States. You see the favelas in Brazil. And also what you can see, and again, a moment where it's perfectly the right time to think about these politics, is we're seeing an emergence of black politics across the globe. Black Lives Matter across the West. I've got a picture there of Rose Must Fall in South Africa. You could have End SARS. People are starting to wake up to the reality that 60 years after independence, so-called independence, we're still kind of in the same position, right? Some of us are doing okay, but most of us are doing just as badly as we were before. So thinking black is this politics which connects us all together. And this is vitally important as we go forward. And the second part that we need to think about and go back to these debates at the founding of the OAU was the nation. What does it mean to be a nation? This is why I've called the talk Black is a Country. One, black is absolutely important, but two, we need to think about that solidarity, not just in emotional terms, but actually in practical terms. What is the biggest barrier to Africa, I would argue, today? It is the nation state, ironically, right? Think about these nation states. These nation states were created by Europe relatively recently, all of them, right? But actually, Ethiopia is slightly different because Ethiopia wasn't formally colonized, but also Ethiopia's border has that bigger straight line because Ethiopia was subject to colonization in the same way in other places. Actually, one of the things, as you walk around Ethiopia, you can see it, right? Neo-colonialism, World Bank, IMF, et cetera, just as much here as in other parts of the continent. So if you think about these nation states, they were created by Europeans. Many of the conflicts within the nation states are because of this, right? Arbitrary borders, putting people together doesn't really make any sense. And we have these containers, and one of the debates in the 60s, early 60s before the OAU, was how do we unify Africa? Do we unify Africa on the basis of these nation states created by Europe, or do we unify Africa on the basis of a federal Africa? All of us together. And what happened was there was a compromise because we sought unity, and we said, no, let's keep nation-state sovereignty. Let's organize our collection, this we still have today in the AU, organize ourselves through these nation states. And there was no more damaging way of organizing solidarity than that, because it's kept us constrained. Remember when Europe came into Africa, what was the reason they could enslave us? It's because they could pit us against each other. And now you have 54, I want to say 54 countries on the continent, and you can pit them against each other. One country by itself cannot resist neo-colonialism. This is a global system. The things that happen in Ethiopia, you cannot solve them without Africa. The things that happen in Nigeria, you cannot solve them without the rest of Africa. Same in the Caribbean, in Jamaica. I don't often get invited to Jamaica because I made the argument that Jamaica just needs to basically give up and come to Africa, right? Like there's no utility in these countries, right? So when we're thinking about where we go forward, look, we have the countries, I'm talking to heads of states of these nations. This is not to say we just get rid of the nations tomorrow, but it is to say that actually the unity we need has to go beyond different countries sitting down. It has to be about how do we plan effectively across the continent? How do we have genuine intercontinental unity and provision? So for example, you think about the free trade zone that's coming about, you think about the road. This should have happened years ago. And it would have been far easier to happen years ago if we thought federally rather than nationally, right? There is no solution to any of your country's problems that isn't an African solution. And so the question is, how do we build that cross solidarity? One of the quotes I was going to put up but didn't was Amilcar Cabral talked about you have a stage of national struggle and then you have the African struggle. But unfortunately, what's happened is we had the national struggle and then we got stuck. We didn't have the African struggle. We didn't unite and we didn't connect to each other. Now again, Ethiopia is a perfect place to have these conversations around Pan-Africanism, the monument to Nkrumah. Also again, Malcolm X, to come back to Malcolm X, because Malcolm X, as much as being my favorite person intellectually, also provides a quite good blueprint for how you do this. So in 1964, Malcolm, after visiting the OAU, founded the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And he said in this organization, this needs to be an organization that unifies all of those Africans in the diaspora and then connects to the African Union, and we have a global organization of black people which effectively can decide where do we go forward, what do we do next, what's our politics, what's our agenda. And importantly, and this says Africa will not go forward any faster than we will, and we will not go forward any faster than Africa will. We have one destiny, and we've had one past, right? So thinking about how do you integrate the diaspora into Africa as well? How do we think about, I just think of myself as African, right? I'm there, I live in England, but I never, ever, ever would say I'm English, right? And how do we do that in practical terms? So I want to be relatively practical on this, because one of the things that we want to organize is we want to bring together people, right? We want to say, how do you do this? We want to organize a Congress where we say, let's bring together the black world. And not just through nation states, not just through the AU, we bring together civil society groups from across the UK, from across Brazil, from across Europe, from across the African continent. We bring us all together into one body to think about these issues, right? This is the key challenge as we go back to this original state and we look at this challenge. The key challenge facing Africa is the growing population, is how do we build the infrastructure, is how do we feed everybody in these 3 billion. I promise you there is no, if we keep going down the same route we're going down, disaster is the only thing that can happen from this population growth. We need to radically rethink. And that means continental organizing, that means diaspora organizing, that means how do we build the black nation so that we can all sustain each other, and how do we make Africa independent so we don't need to rely on all of the negative influences from outside. And I think that's my time. So I'm going to stop and leave you there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kayinde Andrews. Another round of applause for that presentation. Black is a country, Pan-Africanism in the 21st century. Fascinating. For those of you who are just coming in, welcome, first of all. There will be another presentation, and then there will be an open discussion with priority given to the heads of states and the ministers. So quite a fascinating presentation there. The next presentation will be from Dr. Adifris Worku. So I'd like to invite him up. He is a senior forest and climate specialist and coordinator of the Green Legacy Initiative Technical Committee. His presentation is titled The Green Legacy Initiative of Ethiopia, Nature-Based Solutions to Promote Pan-Africanism. A round of applause for Dr. Adifris Worku.
Good morning, Excellencies, honorable guests, and all protocols observed. Welcome to this session. Professor has been saying that we need to revitalize the Pan-Africanism in the continent Africa, and I'm going to add a little bit of spice. How can we achieve this? And we have been thinking that Ethiopia's Green Legacy Initiative, this is a flagship program that has been led for the past 4 years by the government of Ethiopia and its people, which we think can also be, looked as a mechanism to revitalize Pan-Africanism on the ground. So that I'm going to take you through how this is going to support. So the title of my presentation is Ethiopia's Green Legacy Initiative. This is a nature-based solution to our socio-economic and environmental crisis that all the African people, government, and also our ecosystem have been facing, so that this initiative, we think, is going to support us to revitalize Pan-Africanism. So I'm not going to take you, so much on this very grievance that Africa as a continent has been facing. Professor has been saying that we have a very short life expectancy. Our GDP is very small compared to even the other continents which are considered relatively poor. And you can also imagine how environmental issues or environmental crises have been undermining, those ambition of Africa to be a developed or prosper country. Indeed, Africa do have a wealth of natural resource, water, soil, land, and the people. But because we are not wisely and sustainably managing that very ambitious and very important natural resource, so that we have been losing. And as you see from this figure, this is a very important study that have been done globally, showing that almost quarter of African landmass have been, showing different level of natural resource degradation. So you can see that the largest number is for Africa. And you see that figure, on the amount of, degradation of soil and water pollution, and also the amount of livestock we have been, losing every year because of drought and also flood. And this figure on the left showed that this is a study based on a panel data showing that the GDP of Ethiopia is a 1-to-1 ratio to rainfall variability in this country. When we do have good rain, then our GDP is fine, and when we do have, a bad rain or a fluctuating rain or precipitation, that our GDP has also been falling very much. And many African countries are indifferent when it comes to this. So this figure has been showing that unless and otherwise we solve this environmental crisis that we have been facing together, it is going to be, very challenging to see the Africa that we want. So we have been saying that Ethiopia, the government of Ethiopia and its people have recognized that we need to really do something against this environmental and socio-economic crisis. And the Prime Minister of the country, His Excellency Abiy Ahmed, has launched this Green Legacy Initiative in 2019. And the aim was to plant 20 billion seedlings. And the understanding is that if we do this, we are going to meet the many goals or targets that have been identified in the Sustainable Development Goal. So the Green Legacy Initiative, which aimed to plant 20 billion seedlings, we have been really doing that on the ground over the last 4 years, and the goal has been achieved, but we have also surpassed that target, and the data we have from all our region has been showing that we planted 25 billion seedlings over the last 4 years. And these seedlings have been, a variety of them. Some are for serving for food, some are for environmental protection, and some are for production purposes. So there are forestry, there are agroforestry species, so on and so forth. So how we achieved this massive intervention in the history of landscape restoration over the last many years is because of the very organized leadership that has been guided by the top managers of the country. So that, as you see many photos which indicate also how many times the Prime Minister himself and the Deputy Prime Minister and his cabinet is able to go out and plant tree seedlings, which have motivated, the youth and also the citizens. So the leadership have been, one of the role that helped us achieve that very ambitious target in restoring the degraded landscape. So also the Green Legacy Initiative of Ethiopia is able to create, a lot of green jobs, which is a problem in Africa, particularly for women and boys. And also, we lessons have been showing that the Green Legacy Initiative that we began 4 years ago is able to, diversify the farming system of the farmers, where you see, farmers have been starting to get, some of the fruit that they have planted on their landscape. And regionally or nationally, our landscape, which have degraded and, undermines the livelihood of many communities in Ethiopia, has been changing now. You can see that church. And some years ago, that landscape looks like that. And this is in Amhara region in an Awi zone. Now you see the plantation clusters that have been created over there, where the farmers have been, getting a lot of biomass to construct their house, to fulfill their wood demand, and also taking a lot of products to the market even. So we have been saying also that the Green Legacy Initiative has been supporting the government to conserve these cloud forests, because these forests are very important. I'm going to show you in the next slide, because Ethiopia is one of the top 5 and the 25 biodiversity-rich country in continent Africa and globally, so that it is the responsibility of the government of Ethiopia to conserve actually these forests, because we are the signatory to many, many global platforms or protocols, where the the Green Legacy Initiative of Ethiopia has also been helping us to conserve, our natural forests. So, this is your coffee, which originates in Ethiopia, that Ethiopia has, given to the global community, and where you find this coffee, in these forests. And it is mandatory for Ethiopia and also the continent Africa to conserve those forests so that we will keep our coffee not to disappear. So the other very important part of the implication of the Green Legacy Initiative of Ethiopia is that despite the African countries have been have this boundary, political boundary or governance boundary, we are honestly speaking are one. We are very much connected hydrologically, for instance, among others. You can imagine the Blue Nile that begins in Ethiopia will cross all those landscapes to the north of the continent. And also, if you see the other map, you can see that many, many rivers have to flow to the downstream countries. We have Wabishabale, for instance, going to Mogadishu. We have Juba that going to South Sudan, and we have the Blue Nile that have to cross Sudan and also the Egypt. That means that without conserving or sustainably managing the natural resource in the mountains of Ethiopia, the impact is not only for Ethiopia, but also for the downstream countries. So the Green Legacy Initiative of Ethiopia has also been giving us hand to sustain the flow of those very important transboundary rivers in the continent. So that is why we say that Green Legacy Initiative deserves to be a Pan-African platform or a Pan-African initiative. So I will go on this one. And also Green Legacy Initiative has a global implication. For instance, climate change is our common threat, our common problem, and common challenge. We need to do, against this very serious challenge. And one of the things that we need to do is to mitigate or to remove carbon from the atmosphere, and also to keep some of the stock in the soil and the forest. So we have been trying to compute the amount of carbon that the Green Legacy Initiative intervention have been removing from the atmosphere, and the figure that we have been getting is an immense. So on my last slide, this could be maybe roughly the take-home message, that the Green Legacy Initiative indicates that the political commitment of the government of Ethiopia and its people to fight against climate change and also desertification and loss of biodiversity. And by promoting Green Legacy Initiative, we have been saying that Ethiopia will enter into a circular economy or bioeconomy, which in other words has been mentioned as a green economy or sustainable economy. So we have been also considering the Green Legacy Initiative as a platform to strengthen the cooperation between two countries. In the last years, we tried to share some seedlings or germplasm with our neighboring countries. For instance, I see the president of Djibouti, and also South Sudan, and some of our neighboring countries, including Eritrea. This doesn't mean that Ethiopia do have ample resources to do so, but the government of Ethiopia put the direction that Green Legacy Initiative needs to be a continental initiative, so that let's try to share some of seedlings with our neighboring countries so that we transform our degraded landscape to be a green. And they said that we, as an expert and also as a coordinator of the Green Legacy Initiative Technical Committee, call up on our sister countries, brother countries, to join hands so that we will make this Green Initiative to be a Pan-African initiative, so that once we introduce sustainable management of our natural resource, that we will really cross this vicious circle of poverty. And thank you very much, and that is what I wanted to say. You have that one.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Adifris Worku, Senior Forest and Climate Specialist and Coordinator of the Green Legacy Initiative Technical Committee. Before we move into our moderated session, I just want to recognize some of our heads of states that are here. His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of Ethiopia, was here and gave a speech but had to run out on urgent matters, as well as His Excellency Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs Demeke Mekonnen, who are also here. Also here with us are His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, the President of Nigeria. We also have His Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mohammed, President of Somalia. His Excellency Evariste Ndayishimiye, President of Burundi. Her Excellency Jessica Alupo, Vice President of Uganda, the Honorable Nancy Tembo, the Foreign Minister of Malawi, and as well as Kenya's Minister of Environment. So I just want to take a moment and a round of applause for all of you taking the time to be. Thank you. We know you're very busy and your plates are full, so we appreciate that you made the time to be here at this forum. I'd also like to thank all of the ministers that are here. It's really great that you are with us today. So the next part is a moderated discussion with priority given to the heads of states. We'd love to hear your thoughts from a leadership perspective on the presentations that you have heard. For that session, I'm going to invite Dr. Rahel Kasahun. She is the founder and director of African Unbound Center. It's a Pan-African educational organization based here in Addis. She's also a development economist. She's taught at the University of California, worked at the World Bank in Washington, and she's also a member of the Independent Council of Economic Advisors in Ethiopia. Dr. Rahel Kasahun.
Thank you very much, Harmela. Excellencies, presidents, prime ministers, ministers, and ambassadors, welcome. It's wonderful to see you all today here. I am delighted to be here to celebrate Pan-Africanism today as we rethink What should Pan-Africanism look like in the 21st century? I'd like to take a moment here to recognize and to express my deepest appreciation for the organizers of this forum, Dr. Mihret, Hewitt, and the rest of the AFLEX team. Thank you very much. We don't have much time, so I'll just move directly into the substance of our discussion. The theme of our discussion is reinvigorating Pan-Africanism for a changing world. So what can Professor Andrews give us some points to think about? And if we think about Pan-Africanism, what it has achieved so far, and what we need to achieve as we move forward, as we look forward, I thought we would try with the basics. What does it mean to be a Pan-African today? I, for example, my family consists of 3 ethnic groups here in Ethiopia. But I'm also a very proud Ethiopian. I move around with my Ethiopian passport, and I'm a very proud Ethiopian. My work and my life is focused on Africa and Pan-Africanism. And I also would like to claim a space for myself as a global citizen. So the question is, do I have to choose one of these communities to belong to, or can I identify with all of these identities? Can I move around with all of these identities? So I thought, and what could be the benefits and the costs of seeing ourselves in expanded ways, or at different levels? So I just wanted to just kind of open the floor for us to think for a moment about what would Pan-Africanism look like? How can we shape the agenda of being a Pan-Africanism in the 21st century? Anyone? Dr. Fizum, you always have something to say. And you're always very good. You're a good speaker, so you want to take a crack? No. Anybody? In the audience? Yes, please. No, over there. Okay, go. First there, and then to you, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Maxime Winato. I'm the Regional Director for UN Women, East and Southern Africa, based in Nairobi. I want to thank Ethiopia for organizing this gathering, and I want to recognize and salute all of the eminent presidents in the room. I want to take the perspective of looking at Pan-Africanism as a homegrown, politically rooted, but mostly economically motivated movement that renew itself. Looking at the presentation that we initially had that shows where we are coming from and capturing the emerging, looking back is a good thing, but looking forward is better. And I want to point to the fact of feminism as the center of Africanism as well. Because the growth that the Pan-Africanist movement can demonstrate has to start from places of weaknesses. Economically, what are the places where productivity has been very low? Politically, what are the places or the forces that we have not been able to harness into our political development? Urbanism, rural area, what are the groups that are behind? And the UN says, leave no one behind. So when the Pan-Africanism captures those ideas of feminism, or of leave no one behind, I think it's the potential for development. And we would like to call on all of the people here to be able to consider vulnerability, intersectional vulnerability, as an engine for African Pan-Africanism and development. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And over there, please.
My name is Dr. Naol Mardasa. I am a professional in engineering management. I was thinking about Pan-Africanism in the past few days. I don't know if we can put that in a box, right? I think some of us would have a multifaceted definition based on where we are in the space, right? In our profession, in our passion, and what we do. For me, Pan-Africanism is Africa's challenge and concerns can be solved by African solutions, right? With context awareness of the local, nuances of the challenge, right? Not any solution is created equal. We have to understand the context of the local for any solution. That's how I see Pan-Africanism and solving African challenges by local and African solutions. That's how I say it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Hermela, behind you.
Thank you very much. Idris Mohammed from Ethiopian Diaspora Association, President. As a diaspora, I would like to champion the Pan-Africanism, and congratulations for such a wonderful meeting. But as a professor from UK, from Birmingham previously speaking, that he was concentrating on the history of colonization of Africa. I think we should stop that and follow the new leadership of Africa, that thinking of united Africa looking forward. Of course, it's advisable to keep our history in the past. In the 19th century, when Pan-Africanism started, yes, it was for the free of Africa from the colonization. But at the present, I think we should follow the new leadership of Africa that trying to unite Africa and look forward and bear in mind, keep the history of our colonization and not making an excuse that for our success to go forward into 21st century of Africa. So I would like Pan-Africanism to follow the new political leadership of Africa to union free movement of people, free movement of goods, and then go forward like European Union, like Arab League, and look forward. So we, the diaspora community, we would like the Pan-Africanism to be championed, to look forward, bury the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I know our heads of state have to leave very soon, so I'll move it forward. Before we go to the tree planting ceremony, there's one more point that I would like to raise. Frantz Fanon, the political philosopher, said, every generation has to identify its mission and choose to either fulfill it or betray it. And I believe the issue, one of the most pressing issues of our generation is the issue of resource management. Resource management, as you know, is probably the root cause of most of our conflict in the world today. Dr. Adafris showed us that about a fourth of our land, arable land in Africa, is degraded. That's a lot. But our ancestors actually lived very intimately connected to the land. That's not our history. When we go back a few years, even a few hundred years, we see that our ancestors had lived very deeply connected to the land. In fact, they didn't consider, they didn't believe there was a difference between them and the land that they were living on. Unlike modern day, today's, particularly, corporates in the corporate world, resources are seen as something to be exploited for the benefit of the few. But our ancestors believed that they were not only just part, they believed not only were they part of the earth and the nature, they believed they were nature, actually. So they took care of it because the land took care of them. The food they ate, the water they drank, the medicine they needed when they got sick, all of it directly came from the land. In fact, Imhotep, the first physician in the world, identified and treated he documented over 3,000 medicinal species of plants and transferred that knowledge to next generations. So that's how they lived with the land, with great respect and reciprocity. But in our world today, the land has just been something to extract from. So Dr. Adolphus and I were talking yesterday, and we were thinking, how do we address this issue effectively in Africa? Because it doesn't affect just one nation. Our borders are porous. There's a lot of migration. So the land can be used by the same people on both sides of the border. Our rivers flow across the continent. And of course, climate change affects the entire world. So we need an approach that is coordinated and prioritized, and that can be implemented effectively. So how do we do that? And we thought, well, what if we establish an organization, a Pan-African institution, much like the African CDC, the African the African Center for Disease Control. What if we establish some organization like it that will be, and its mandate will be to coordinate Africa's approach to sustainable resource management? So could that be an option? Or are there other alternative solutions that we can think of in order to ensure that we manage our resources more effectively, we rehabilitate the land, we ensure the rivers can once again flow, they're clean, the water is drinkable, and future generations will be able to appreciate and use the land as previous generations did, because there is no guarantee that the land will continue to sustain life as we know it, as we move into the future. Time is very, very tight. Our heads of state have to leave. We're very grateful for your presence here. If there are any closing remarks that you would like to make before we move on to the the tree planting ceremony.
Excellencies, heads of state and government, excellencies, ministers, ambassadors, distinguished guests, thank you very much for coming and for these generous contributions. The African Leadership Excellence Academy is really a young and emerging one, looking for new perspectives to train, capacitate, and nurture new leadership, to think about the new global dynamism and to set a vision and a practical response for this unpredictable world and different challenge. In this regard, this gathering is really a landmark step to strengthen and to look forward in the upcoming times. Second, when you talk about green legacy, it's not as simple and a separate intervention in our national transformation agenda. Green legacy by itself is about climate change, it's about food security, it's about sustainable development and related response. Perhaps this year, the government were trying to look to integrate a green legacy program with other different development activities. It's about to address nutrition, to address sustainable development, to address food security and the like. This flagship program is really the entry point to address different challenges, to alleviate poverty and address other challenges. And again, when you talk about development, green legacy and others, the center piece of the agenda is about human development, about human security, about the livelihood issue as a whole. In this regard, it needs a constant effort and a responsibility from different players, the civic society, the academia, and other actors. And that leads to a strong national and continental responsibility to address all outstanding issues. Finally, I would like to express my profound appreciation to the presenters, contributors, and those who organize the whole programs, and my sister, Dr. Rahel also. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. So a decentralized approach that is inclusive and requires the participation of all stakeholders. With that, let's wrap up the morning session, and Hermela will tell us what we need to do next.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Rahel Kasahun. It looks like I was beat to it. I was wrong. His Excellency, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Demeke Mekonnen, is obviously still here. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for that comment. So a couple of announcements before we break. Again, thank you for all the heads of states for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here, for the ministers that made this a priority to be here. We really appreciate it. So the next session will be for the heads of states. It's a tree planting and photo ceremony. So the media, please take your positions. And the heads of states, you will be guided out this way to the tree planting. Everyone else, just please stay in the room. There is also lunch for everyone, so please stick around. There's an afternoon program as well with a few more presentations and an open discussion. Appreciate everybody participating. Everyone else, please stay in the room. The heads of states, when you're able, you can make your way towards the stage. Thank you so much.